Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We are so excited to see that 1,500 of you registered to join us today. My name is Shani Reichman, and I'm the director of IPF Atid, the Young Professionals Initiative of Israel Policy Forum. And I'm pleased to welcome you all to this special webinar convened in partnership with the following organizations: Israel Policy Forum, the Union for Reform Judaism, the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, the Rabbinical Assembly, Reconstructing Judaism, the Jewish Council on Public Affairs, the National Council of Jewish Women, Ameinu, and the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. These organizations are demonstrating the value of partnership in our community at this consequential moment for Israel and for how we as North American Jews view our role in the developments taking place there. As the director of Israel Policy Forum's Young Professional Program, I've engaged with young adults throughout North America over the past several weeks across many organizations and political perspectives, and they have watched the developments in Israel with growing concern, as I'm sure many of you joining us today have. Many of us are concerned with how the proposed judicial changes in Israel will impact Israel's democracy and the shared democratic values that have long been at the core of the US-Israel relationship. Many of us are concerned about Israel's future as a homeland for the Jewish people, following proposals to narrow Israel's conception of who is a Jew for purposes of Aliyah, an issue that impacts many Jews worldwide. We are all concerned about Israel's security, as Israel has been targeted with the escalation of terror attacks amidst growing instability in the West Bank. Just as many of us are concerned by the Israeli government's pledges to strengthen its presence in the West Bank and make a future two-state outcome impossible, further placing into question Israel's future democracy and security. The pressing issue today, of course, is the proposed judicial reform by Justice Minister Yariv Levin that has brought tens of thousands to protest in the streets of Israel for weeks and has led to strong opposition being voiced from many prominent figures across Israeli society, from political leaders to security officials, legal scholars, business leaders, and more having all spoken out. 2 weeks ago, 3 influential pro-Israel voices, well known to the American Jewish community, Yossi Klein Halevi, Matti, Friedman, and Daniel Gordis, wrote an open letter to North American Jews, calling on all of us to make our voices heard on this issue. We are so fortunate to have Yossi Klein Halevi join us today in conversation with Sarah Hurwitz, 2 exceptionally thoughtful authors and thinkers, to unpack this message and this critical moment for Israel. Yossi is a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. Together with Imam Abdullah and Tepli of Duke University, he co-directs the Institute's Muslim Leadership Initiative, which teaches emerging young Muslim American leaders about Judaism, Jewish identity, and Israel. Halevi's 2013 book, Like Dreamers, won the Jewish Book Council's Everett Book of the Year award. His latest book, Letters to My Palestinian Neighbor, was a New York Times bestseller. He writes for leading op-ed pages in the US, including The Times and The Wall Street Journal, and is a former contributing editor to The New Republic. Sarah Hurwitz was a White House speechwriter from 2009 to 2017, starting out as a senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama, and then serving as head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. Sarah is the author of Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism after finally choosing to look there, which was a finalist for 2 National Jewish Book Awards and for the Sammy Rohr Prize for Jewish Literature. Before I turn the floor to Sarah, I want to note that we welcome your questions. You can type a question in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen, and Sarah and Yossi will address as many questions as possible following their initial conversation. On behalf of all of the sponsoring organizations today, thank you so much, Yossi and Sarah, for being with us. I will now turn the floor over to you, Sarah. Thank you all again.
Thank you so much, Shani, for that very kind introduction and for your outstanding leadership in running Atid. You are inspiring so many young people to care about Israel and to step up and help shape its future, and we are very grateful for everything you're doing. I also want to recognize IPF's CEO, David Halperin. I have had the privilege of doing an IPF trip to Israel with David, and I learned a tremendous amount and was just blown away by David's passion and commitment and by everything that he's done to make IPF the widely respected organization that it is today. So thank you, David. And finally, Yossi Klein Halevi, it is such a pleasure to be here with you today. Yossi, for so many years, I have admired you as this brilliant, deeply insightful writer and thinker. And having recently had the privilege of getting to know you as a friend, I now admire you as a singularly wonderful, soulful, generous, and just deeply kind human being. So I'm thrilled to be in conversation with you today.
Well, Sarah, I'm really thrilled to be in conversation with you as well. And you were one of the strong drawing cards for doing this at 9 p.m. in Jerusalem. So really delighted.
I feel the same way about you. Great. So let's just jump in. So, as Shini mentioned, you and Danny Gordis and Matti Friedman recently wrote a letter to American Jews in which you state that defending Israel doesn't just mean speaking out against its usual critics and adversaries. It also means, and I'm going to quote from your letter, defending it from a political leadership that is undermining our society's cohesion and its democratic ethos, the foundations of the Israeli success story. In this letter, you raise alarm about the new government's proposed judicial reforms, noting, the Prime Minister's plan effectively concentrates nearly all power in the hands of one person, the Prime Minister himself. This is no judicial reform, but a dramatic alteration that would bring Israel's governing system closer not to the US and Canada, but to Hungary and Turkey. And about the Prime Minister himself, you write, understandably, many of Israel's supporters want to believe that Netanyahu is still a cautious conservative loyal to the country's liberal DNA. In fact, though, he has become a very different kind of leader, one who subverts the national interest to his own. A wise leader encourages unity among his people. Netanyahu is stoking hatred and schism. So I'm wondering, what compelled you to write this open letter, and what has the response been like? And I'm also curious as to what you think of President Herzog's call this weekend for compromise on the judiciary.
So I'll speak for myself. I think that each of the three of us who signed the letter, wrote the letter, would have perhaps a slightly different way of answering the question. For me, I felt a need to speak directly to the Jewish community in which I grew up, and in a certain sense never left. I even when I made Aliyah 40 years ago, and this was I just recently marked my 40th anniversary as an Israeli, I maintained a very deep and organic relationship with the American Jewish community. American Jews have been my primary readers. I write mostly for the American Jewish community, and so this sense of turning to American Jews when there's an emergency in Israel is what I've been doing for 40 years. The difference is that this is the first time that I'm turning to American Jews on what I regard as an internal life and death threat. And in the past, the impulse was always to turn to American Jews to be together when Israel was facing external danger. And this really is a departure for me in that sense, but I feel that the threat is no less acute, and maybe in some ways more acute, certainly more painful, because it's generated from within. The other piece of this for me is that what I've tried to do all these years in writing for American Jews is to explain the complexity of Israel's dilemmas, whether it was on the Palestinians, whether the left and right divide, the religious secular divide, Arab Israelis, the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, always trying to in a sense, mediate between different sides of an issue. This time, I felt no empathy, no need to be reaching out and explaining the other side. Now, it's not that the other side doesn't have an argument. There is an argument. There's an argument for judicial reform. The court has overreached. There's virtually no diversity on the court. We have one Mizrahi out of 15 Supreme Court judges. There is room, significant room for reform. But what we're facing now is not reform, it's a revolution. And it's being conducted by the least morally legitimate government in Israel's history. Politically, this was a democratically elected government. Morally, I don't regard this as a normative government. I don't regard it as a moral government. And most of all, a government headed by a prime minister who's on trial on 3 charges of corruption has no right to be initiating the deepest judicial changes that any Israeli government has ever undertaken. So for all those reasons, I feel and felt this urgent need to step out of character and not to be writing this time in a more balanced way, because I feel this is not complicated. The Palestinian issue is complicated. Religion and state is complicated. This is not complicated. You asked about the responses that I got. They ranged from gratitude, and there were certainly a lot more expressions of gratitude than anything else, all the way to anger and feelings of betrayal. You know, that the three of us who had been out there defending Israel and explaining Israel in the American media for years, suddenly we're turning against Israel, and we're joining the lynch mob. And my response to that is that if, God forbid, this judicial revolution happens, then there will be very little to defend us, to protect us from the lynch mob. And I'm thinking specifically about what is awaiting us at The Hague and in other international legal forums. Until now, we have been protected from excessive intervention by international forums because of the reputation of the Israeli judicial system. And because the Supreme Court was seen to have integrity, to have independence, there was a sense in international legal forums that Israel on bottom can be trusted to monitor itself. If these changes go through, we are going to be extremely vulnerable in international legal forums. And that's something that a lot of the Israeli public has not yet internalized. This is a mortal threat to Israel internationally. So when I weigh the admitted risk of empowering Israel's enemies against the consequences of this plan going through, for me, there was no contest.
And what do you think about President Herzog's call this weekend?
Very ambivalent. I understand that he's trying to act presidential. He doesn't have any power. It's a ceremonial position. But I was upset that there was no strong defense of the Supreme Court justices, of Chief Justice Esther Chayut, who is surrounded by bodyguards. Our Attorney General has been placed by the Shin Bet in the highest category of risk because of death threats. And I would expect our president to turn to the government and say, stop the incitement against the judiciary. We didn't hear that. I was also upset by his, in Hebrew we say, if you want to say that an Israeli is being excessively even-handed, you say, stop acting like the UN. And when Herzog said that whichever side of this debate wins, we will all lose. In other words, if one side wins, then the other half of the country will feel aggrieved. We'll all lose. I'm sorry. Don't be the UN. There is no symmetry here between what this government is trying to do and those of us who are trying to stop this from happening. And I understand that Herzog is trying, again, to play the role of mediator, but there's really a limit to how much you can equivocate before you start debasing yourself. And I'm with the critics of the president on this one.
Okay. So, this feels like a pivotal moment for Israel-diaspora relations, not just because of the concerns that you've raised about Israel's democracy, but also because of the government's proposed measures to redefine who's considered a Jew for the purposes of making Aliyah, as well as proposals that many believe would be hugely harmful to LGBTQ people. So can you comment on these additional issues? And do you think the far right has any legitimate concerns here?
So, there's a wider context in which this debate is happening. And that is the feeling that so many of us have in Israel and in the diaspora, that this is a government unlike any we've ever encountered. This is not a normative right-wing government. When defenders of the government try to dismiss the protesters in the streets as sore losers, we've lived with Likud governments for 40 years. And nothing has elicited this kind of sustained outrage. Many of us have been out on the streets week after week, sometimes day after day, and planning to go back. I mean, the people here are beside themselves. And the notion that this is all about trying to unseat a Likud government, we've never had a government like this before. And we can begin with the simple fact that this is the most homogeneous coalition in Israel's history. If you examine any previous coalition, there's always some odd party that doesn't totally fit, and that's necessary to have a dissonant voice so that the coalition doesn't speak entirely with one voice. This, yes, there are differences in this government. The Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, have their agenda. The Likud has its agenda, but those differences are small compared to what unites these parties. And I would say that what unites them all is a deep loathing for secular Israel, certainly secular liberal Israel, what they call the left. There is no left in Israel anymore. And I think this is something that American Jews need to internalize, especially people who are on this call. If you look at the Knesset, the Labor Party, the founding party of the state of Israel, is the smallest party in the Knesset. Meretz didn't get in. There's no left. We're talking about the center versus the right. And so the government tries to dismiss the legitimacy of the demonstrations by saying this is the left's attempt to unseat the right. And besides being the most homogeneous coalition, this is obviously the most extreme coalition we've ever had from a political point of view and a religious point of view. And then factor in, this is something that I think is less of acute concern in the diaspora and much more of an Israeli internal concern, is the quality of this government, the quality of their governance. The fact that every party in the Knesset, with one exception, is headed by someone, by a man, they're all men, of course, is headed by a man who either has been convicted of crimes or in Netanyahu's case is currently on trial. And the one exception is Goldknopf, the head of the United Torah Judaism Haredi party, over whom there's a big question mark of corruption. There are all kinds of scandals brewing. So this is a coalition that is headed by men who have either been convicted or are on trial for ideological crimes, in the case of Ben Gvir and Smotrich, or simple crimes of greed and corruption. So this is not a normative government by any means. And if you look at what this government has done in terms of what we call in Hebrew mamlachtiyut. Mamlachtiyut doesn't have any equivalent English term that I know of. But what it really means is respecting the integrity of the state. This is a Ben Gurion concept, and it was very important in the early years of the state in creating a national identity among a people that didn't know how to govern itself for 2,000 years. And mamlachtiyut really tried to inculcate in Israelis a respect for the institutions of the state, the ethos of the state. This government has trampled on our institutions. We have 2 justice ministers, 2, because Netanyahu had to had to appease all of the members of the coalition demanding positions. We have two defense ministers who are now fighting it out on a daily basis. In other words, the notion of good governance, of respecting the institutions of the state, has been turned into a mockery. And so this is the wider context that I think you need to understand what we're responding to. Now, it's true that the judicial revolution is the main focus, and it needs to be the main focus. But hovering in the background, and for many of us, the foreground, is this notion of this outrageous government. You know, I wake up in the morning and I say sometimes out loud, I say, Itamar Ben-Gvir is in charge of the Israeli police. A Kahanist is in charge of the police. It's surreal. And I refuse to accept this as normative, as morally legitimate. Again, democratically, nothing to do, yes. It's a legitimate, democratically legitimate government. Morally, that's another issue entirely.
Yeah, now that's...
And now for the bad news, Sarah.
I know, exactly. It's very uplifting. Well,
I really try to bring a hopefulness.
Well, I'm just gonna continue on this. I'm just gonna continue on this train that you have boarded us onto. And you know, you've been mentioning the protests, which have truly brought together Israelis from across the right-left divide. And yet, you know, we're seeing an increase in terror attacks. We're seeing growing concerns about stability in the West Bank and the viability of the Palestinian Authority. And we're seeing efforts by far-right players in this government to strengthen settlements and to further the goal of West Bank annexation. You know, as you know, just this week, they retroactively legalized several illegal outposts. So how do you see the Palestinian issue playing into all of this? And what are the worst case scenarios that you're concerned about?
So Sarah, before I get to that question, with your indulgence, if I can go back to your first question, because I suddenly realized something that came out of our little exchange that was on the face of it funny, but really wasn't. And the whole question of hope. And it's always been very important for me when I speak to American Jews to convey a sense of hope, because I feel that, and I feel that again today. I still do. But what motivated me to write this letter to American Jews was the need to treat all of you as Jewish grown-ups. That just as we here are going through one of the most agonizing times in Israel's history, I can think of a handful of other times, the Rabin assassination, the first months of the first Lebanon war, when the soldiers are fighting at the front and we're tearing each other apart. This is certainly comparable to those wrenching moments. And in some ways, it might even be worse, because we're speaking here about the fundamental identity of the country. And I felt this is a moment, if we're serious about treating each other as partners, this is a moment to turn to American Jews and say, I can't sugarcoat this. This is what's happening here. We are facing a life and death moment for Israeli democracy, and we need you, of all people, American Jewry with your deep democratic roots. We need you in this fight, in whatever way. But that's why I felt this desperate need to turn to American Jews. And so that's also really why I so much appreciate this conversation, because I feel I can just speak in full candor to treat all of you the way that I would speak to my fellow Israelis, without any filter, because that's the nature of this moment. So your question on, right, the Palestinians. Yeah, I mean, you could see I don't want to talk about the Palestinians.
I can see. I can see.
And there's actually a reason for that. the reason is, and it's not just a legitimate question, it's an urgent question. But the reason why I instinctively don't want to speak about the Palestinians at this moment is because it's been a loaded issue in the protest movement. There have been people on the far left have come to the demonstrations with Palestinian flags. There have probably been, I don't know, maybe half a dozen Palestinian flags. And Netanyahu seized on those images and has sent them out through social media and has tried to portray the hundreds of thousands of people who've been out in the streets cumulatively over these last 6 weeks, and to portray us as basically anarchists, far left, anti-Zionists, and the pushback has been extraordinary, because what the images that you see, and it's so moving, the images that you'll see are literally thousands of giant Israeli flags that aren't being handed out. People are bringing these flags from home. Now, I don't know where Israelis get these giant flags on poles. I don't have one. I wish I did. but you come to the demonstration and you see it's so moving. Families, they're coming with their big Israeli flags. And there's Netanyahu trying to portray this movement as anti-patriotic. And there's one beautiful clip that I sent you, Sarah, which maybe we can put up in the chat, which Yair Lapid sent out, of the flags, the Israeli flags. And it's so moving. And you see, there is no protest movement in the world that I can think of, certainly one that's not right-wing, that is so patriotic as this Israeli protest movement. You go there, you see people draped in the flag. I saw an old man in a wheelchair wearing a flag like a talit, a prayer shawl. It's this sense of a deep need to protect this country, to protect the flag. And in America, I think one of the things that you've lost in your discourse is that the liberal side feels a little awkward about waving the flag, and there is no hesitation here. And if you look at that clip, you'll see it's a sea of blue and white. And so that's my preface about the Palestinian issue. It's loaded here, and there is a feeling within the mainstream, the centrist protest movement, very strongly, not to bring the Palestinian issue up at this particular moment, when in the coming weeks we're going to be fighting literally for the life of Israeli democracy. So that's one issue. Obviously, we can't avoid what's happening. The terror is back. It's back in a big way. There is growing warning from within military intelligence that a third intifada is brewing. A new generation of Palestinians has come of age that don't remember the crushing Palestinian defeat of the Second Intifada. Israel defeated the Second Intifada. And we bought ourselves nearly 2 decades of quiet, but that's coming to an end. And the last credible Israeli peace offer, when Olmert presented a very serious deal to Mahmoud Abbas, who, as usual, walked away from the table. But 2009 was a long time ago. And we can't keep riding on peace offers of more than a decade ago. And certainly there's not going to be any peace offers anytime soon. And I'll say in all candor that even if Israel put a serious deal on the table, I don't believe the Palestinian leadership would accept it without receiving what they call the right of return to the state of Israel. And so I don't believe a deal is possible anytime soon, but that doesn't free us from the obligation to keep putting a deal on the table. And so where are things heading? The only positive signs that I see is what's happening in the region. And here I would urge the liberal American Jewish community to embrace the Abraham Accords with both hands. And this is, to my mind, the greatest hope, maybe the only hope, for really solving the Palestinian problem, and that is in a regional context. There will be no bilateral Israeli-Palestinian agreement. Everybody here knows it. The Palestinians know it, the Israelis know it. But the wild card here is the region, especially the Saudis. And please, I understand your ambivalence about the Saudis, or you can use a stronger word than ambivalence about the Saudis. I get it, you're right. But from where I'm sitting, the Saudis are the great hope. If the Saudis come into the Abraham Accords, then we have a real possibility of convincing Israelis who are today entirely skeptical, if not despairing of peace, that there's a possibility for changing Israel's place in the region, but that's not going to happen in a full way until we start getting serious about dealing with the Palestinian issue. And so we need the Saudis, we need the Abraham Accords. And one last comment. I recently came back from Morocco. I was there for 2 weeks. And it was an extraordinary experience. I walked around with a kippah everywhere in Morocco. I wouldn't do that in Europe. I wouldn't do that in Brooklyn. But in Morocco, there was no problem. I felt entirely safe. And Morocco is very strongly pro-Palestinian. We saw that in the World Cup. When the Moroccan team was victorious, there were two flags that they were holding up, the Moroccan and the Palestinian. And what people told me in government, in media, and people on the street was that we are pro-Palestinian and we're pro-peace with Israel. No contradiction. And what I said to people was that Morocco is actually more nuanced on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict than many American campuses. That they understand that you can actually be pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel simultaneously. And so this is what we need. We need to strengthen the Abraham Accords. We need to help the Israeli public understand two things. One is that the siege, the 75-year siege, is starting to crack, and we're no longer friendless in the Middle East, which is psychically is a revolution. And I'm still trying to absorb that. And secondly, that transformation of Israel's place in the Middle East will not be complete without bringing the Palestinians in some way into the Abraham Accords.
A lot that you've just covered. Yeah. As a reminder to everyone, just if you have a question, just please type it into the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we're going to be turning to those questions shortly. Yossi, I want to ask you about another topic that you haven't actually hit on yet, which is about, the concerns that many of us have about the demographics of the Jewish Israeli population. A lot of the concerns that you're talking about today sort of play into the fact that the high birth rate among ultra-Orthodox is driving the strength of the right in Israel. And, do you think that demography is destiny here? Like, do you feel, is there a reason to be optimistic given these trends and how they play into the other issues that you've been speaking about?
I struggle with this question. I think most Israelis do. And generally, mainstream non-Haredi Israelis generally try not to think about it, although this government makes it very hard not to think about it. And I'll just add parenthetically that what makes this government especially difficult for liberal Israel is that we're experiencing this as a multiple assault from lots of different directions. The Haredi parties are unrestrained in their demands. It's like a fire sale. And they realize this government is as good as it's ever going to get for them, and they are taking everything they can. We're being assaulted by the far right in a different way. The fragile coexistence between Arab Israelis and Jewish Israelis is one of Ben Gvir's targets. We're being assaulted by Smotrich, who's trying to accelerate the annexation in Judea and Samaria. We're being assaulted by a corrupt prime minister and his corrupt party, and that has targeted the legal system. So on so many levels, we're experiencing this as a violation of what I consider to be sacred to the Israeli ethos. Now, in terms of the Haredim, the abnormal relationship of the Haredim to Israeli society has to change. That relation, I would define that abnormal relationship as having four facets. The first is to separate from the responsibilities of basic responsibilities of Israeli citizenship and create a kind of state within a state. The second is to demand that mainstream Israel subsidize that separation. The third is to impose religious legislation on those Israelis who are subsidizing their separatism. And the fourth, and in some ways for me most outrageous and painful offense, is never to express gratitude to Zionism, to the state of Israel, to secular Israelis who are subsidizing and protecting the Haredi Renaissance. So that relationship has to change. In regard to your question about whether demography is destiny, yes, if current trends continue. If we change the ground rules, and if the massive subsidy of the state within a state starts to slow down, if we begin to push back, if we have a different government. Look, the last government succeeded in getting the Belzer Hasidim, which one of the major Hasidic sects, to agree to teach secular subjects in their schools, a major step. Then this government comes in, and Netanyahu, the first surrender that Netanyahu does to the Haredim is to cancel the demand that, or the link between funding for Haredi schools and acceptance of a secular curriculum. So now Belz is not teaching the secular curriculum. So it's up to the Israeli mainstream public. If we push back hard enough, and I think this government is going to galvanize mainstream Israel. This is the good news here. Israelis are finally realizing that if we don't take a stand against the state within a state, against the rise of the ultra-right, against the corruption and the assault on the judicial system, then God forbid we're going to lose this country. And so that gives me hope. You know, in some ways, I hate to say it, it's a kind of a Bolshevik mindset of the worse things are, the better they'll get. I'm not sure it really works that way. But given the fact that this government has made things really so bad that it's almost inconceivable, and the reaction has been so powerful among mainstream Israelis, it's so moving to stand in these crowds and to know that everyone around you, 200,000 people, and that's how many I think that we had the other day at the Knesset. Everyone is going through what you're going through. Everyone's losing sleep, and I'm losing sleep. I've never lost sleep I didn't lose sleep about the Iran deal. I hated the Iran deal. I fought the Iran deal. I never lost sleep about the security. I never lost sleep about terrorism. You live with it. I'm losing sleep about this. And so that's a good thing, because it means that we're really going to push back. And eventually, I think we're going to push back on this as well, on the Haredi issue as well.
And, I'm hearing you say that these protests, this uprising, this outcry, you do think it's going to bear some fruit. And I'm curious, so I actually want to turn to some audience questions now. And there's one from David Wise, which actually echoes what I was going to make my final question. He writes, as a Jew and Zionist living in the US, I of course want to speak out in defense of democracy. But does this government care what diaspora Jews say and want? Are there any external voices that could grab this coalition's attention? And I just, I want to build on that a little bit and kind of push you a little bit, because in your letter, you yourself wrote, quote, and I'm quoting, Israel belongs first to all of its citizens and they have the final word. So, my question for you is, will Israelis care what we Americans say? And, when you say, I want you to speak up, what does that mean? Is it like write letters to Congress? Is it donate or not donate to certain organizations? Is there a different role for individuals versus some of the organizations that are represented on the Zoom? Can you just say a little bit more about that?
So let's make a distinction here between the Israeli government. Will the Israeli government care, and Israelis generally? The Israeli government doesn't care. The Israeli government doesn't care what its people think. And the polls, by the way, are showing overwhelming opposition to proceeding with this judicial assault at its current pace. A strong majority of Israelis want the government to slow down, including many people who support the government and including some who support the judicial changes. So the government doesn't care. But if the government if American Jewish leaders, and I'm thinking of the Jewish organizations that have Netanyahu's ear, and unfortunately, I don't think it's any of the organizations that are on this call. I hope I'm wrong, but I doubt it. But other organizations that do have his ear, I don't have to name them, we all know what they are. I would like to see American Jews who belong to those organizations calling up their local representatives of those organizations, or the national leadership, if you have those connections, and saying, what are you doing about this? How are we going to be able to continue defending Israel if we're not going to be able to talk about shared values and shared democracy anymore? That's been the linchpin of this relationship, of the American government and Israeli government relationship. So it depends who the Israeli government hears from in the American Jewish community. And if it hears from the Hartman Institute, we don't have that we don't have the ear of Netanyahu. We're proud of it, but we don't have his ear. And neither, I imagine, does the IPF or any of the others that we've gathered here. But again, those organizations that do have the ear of Netanyahu, or that have the ear of the Israeli ambassador, that's the kind of message that they need to hear. In terms of, do Israelis care what American Jews think? There's a game that Israelis play. Liberal Israelis will say that American Jews have no right to intervene if they're coming from the right. When right-wing American Jews were protesting during the Oslo years, liberal Israelis were outraged. The same dynamic happens on the right. Right-wing Israelis are outraged when liberal American Jews protest an Israeli government policy. But here's where the game comes in. If American Jews support your camp, that's great. That's great. How much American Jewish money is coming into the right? And that's legitimate. That's fine. And it is fine. It actually is fine. In the same way that it's fine for liberal Israeli projects to be supported by American Jews. I believe that American Jews have the right to protest policies that they believe threaten the existence of Israel. I believe that American Jews on the right had not only the right, but the responsibility to protest during the Oslo years. And I affirmed it. And I affirmed it then, I affirm it now. And it's time to just put that question to rest. And I'm speaking within the Israeli public now. And let's own up to our gratitude that we feel whenever our camp is being supported by the diaspora. And let's make that a shared principle. I draw the line in two places. One is lobbying Congress against an Israeli government. That should be beyond the pale, whether it comes from the left or the right. And the second is American Jewish support for the far left or the far right, for that part of the Israeli public that either opposes Israel's identity as a Jewish state or that opposes Israel's identity as a democratic state. That's where I think if American Jews strengthen the extremes, you are deeply, deeply undermining the stability of Israeli society.
Okay. So we have a question. Thank you.
But you asked me, but Sarah, you asked me, did I answer your question actually? I think I did.
Yes, you did. I think you did. And we have time for one more question. This is from Nancy Kaplan. She writes, Michael Kaplow's new column castigates the Biden administration for not doing enough to express its displeasure over what the coalition is doing, most recently in the decision to retroactively legalize 9 illegal outposts. Kaplow mentions putting the brakes on Israel being approved for the U.S. visa waiver program, also putting off inviting Netanyahu to D.C. That's already happening. The invite is on ice. Kaplow also says that depending on how it's worded, the U.S. might need to abstain, if not vote for, a Security Council resolution regarding the illegal settlements. What does Yossi think?
It's a slippery slope. It's dangerous ground. Now, the Biden administration is truly a friend. I don't think we've had as deep a friendship, certainly that I could feel unequivocally comfortable with since the Clinton administration. And so I understand you're American citizens. You are dealing with a government that is unequivocally pro-Israel, emotionally pro-Israel, not only in terms of its policies. I can't go there as an Israeli. I can't be urging a foreign government, no matter how deeply aligned it is with us, to intervene in our internal affairs. I feel there's a different move here within the Jewish family. I'm appealing to all of you as citizens of the Jewish people, as stakeholders in a Jewish state. And if we say that we're the state of the Jewish people, then that has consequences. We need to respect your intervention. And so that's as far as I personally am ready to go. I'm not going to argue with the other position. I'm just offering my own. Maybe if I can make just some brief closing remarks.
Yeah.
I've been thinking a lot about the 2 flags on the bima of most American synagogues, and how extraordinary it is that American Jews have placed these 2 secular symbols at the most sacred geographical spot in the synagogue. And I think that the deep intuition of American Jews in the 40s and 50s was to sacralize these two flags because these were the symbols of the post-Holocaust Jewish renewal. These are the two flags that really made the renewal of the Jewish people possible after the Holocaust. And so they assumed a kind of sanctity. And the values that these two flags represented for American Jews was the Jewishness of the state and the democratic identity of the state. And they were inseparable, and they were sanctified. And what we're fighting for now are those two flags on the bima, and the ability of American Jews to continue keeping those two flags together at that sacred spot. And this is, in Hebrew, I'm trying to translate the term. This is an alarm in real time. And it's an alarm for everything that has held our relationship together. And I wrote this letter with Matti and Danny because the three of us have been so intimately involved in this relationship. The three of us live on the line between Ben Gurion and JFK, and these are the two communities. These are the two communities that saved the Jewish people after the Shoah, and we together are 90% of the Jewish people. And so this is the moment where, and really, I'll just say one last, with your indulgence, Sarah, one last line, which is what I need right now from American Jews is I don't need unequivocal supporters. I don't need embittered critics. I need partners, genuine partners. I need Jewish grown-ups who don't need me to end on a note of hope, who are with me at this moment of anguish, of great fear, and also of great determination. And what to do, how to do is a secondary question. The first question we need to resolve is, are we emotionally aligned? And that's why we wrote this letter and why we deliberately didn't offer a program of what we want American Jews to do. First of all, let's get emotionally aligned. Let's own this moment together, and then we'll figure out together what to do. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you, Yossi. As usual, you have provided us with a great deal of insight, and you've left us with a great deal to think about today. Thank you for everything you're doing and for taking the time to be with us. It's now, of course. So it's now my pleasure to turn the floor over to Rabbi Josh Weinberg. He is the Vice President for Israel and Reform Zionism at the Union for Reform Judaism and the Executive Director of ARZA, which is the Association of Reform Zionists of America. Rabbi Weinberg.
Thank you, Sarah, so much. And it's really an honor to wrap this session up. And Yossi, allow me to extend my deep gratitude and deep thanks to you for your ability to express and articulate the needs of this moment, and for your clarion call to bring us into this conversation and into this moment, regardless of our geography or where we should live, and that this is a project of the entire Jewish people, and that we should all have something to say about it, and we should all raise our voices at this moment. I also want to extend my deep gratitude to all of the organizations who have co-sponsored today. It just goes to show that we as a Jewish community don't often agree on everything, and it's not always simple to come together around issues of our day. But this is a special moment, and this requires a great deal of unity, and requires us to come together and raise our voices collectively. And we hope that this is really a first of many of a series of discussions among like-minded organizations that are committed to Israel as a Jewish state and as a democratic state. And as a rabbi, I'll take the privilege to just mention that we are in the midst of a poignant and couldn't be more timely Torah reading cycle that we find ourselves in, and that we are watching the justice system of the children of Israel.
Rabbi, I think you are frozen. Yossi, are you saying this as well? You're muted. Oh, there's Shani.
Yes, Josh is frozen, but thank you, Rabbi Josh Weinberg and the Union for Reform Judaism and all of our other partners. We're so grateful that you joined us, and we hope to continue this coalition from organizations across religious denominations, across many different perspectives. And we're really grateful to you, Sarah and Yossi, for this wonderful conversation.
Thank you so much, Shani, and thank you again, Yossi. Pleasure to be with you in conversation today.